All right. Hello, everybody. This is Tom Randall from GoldenCare. I want to welcome you to this webinar today. It's 1 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. Your time is valuable. Hopefully, we'll have a couple more people jumping on, but we've got some numbers here today, which is good. And if this is the first webinar you've been on today, this is Tom Randall. Again, I've been around for 27th year here at GoldenCare, and Dennis Reiner is my partner in crime, if you will. He's been working side by side with me at some level or the other for probably all those 25 to 27 years. Hopefully you'll see that we're in good hands today. We've got a lot of experience, and we've been in the long-term care trenches and the extended care trenches for years and years. And we've had the opportunity to train a lot of agents and train a lot of consumers and educate them about the need for long-term care. So today we're trying to keep these relatively short on some of these intro screens. If some of you are first timers, make sure you go and check out the recorded webinars we have on the site that we'll show you before we let you go today, talking about the fact that we do need to go out and really take the initiative to start the conversation. I usually go into a little bit of an intro here, and today, because we're talking about Medicaid Spenddown, I am just going to spend a second on this, is that the vast majority of people out there are going to need some type of long-term care, and there's a lot of seniors in America you're going to need. And when I say long-term care, we use the word extended care nowadays, because long-term care used to be the only show in town years ago, and now we have a lot of these great short-term care and home health care only products out there. So it is definitely necessary that we get involved. And Dennis, I'll just keep rolling through this intro slide, and you can jump in at the end. And I'm not going to try to spend too much time in this because this is a lot of stats, but I just want to make sure you guys know why it's important and mainly why we can simplify it. You don't have to go to your consumers and show them all these stats by any stretch of the imagination, but it leads so nicely into our conversation today about Medicaid Spenddown that I think it's necessary to spend a few minutes on it. First one overall is, remember, there's 54.1 million Americans right now in America today, and we take that for granted sometime, and these stats have always been there. We knew those baby boomers are popping up. There's 73 million baby boomers alive today, according to the 2020 census anyway, and we know that they're getting older by the handful. 10,000 of them turn 65 or 70 every single day. So you look at that, you hear that, and you kind of let it go. But remember, there's more seniors in America by a long shot than there are people in Canada. So there's a lot of gray hair in America, especially with those baby boomers, right? So we always talked about this, and Dennis and I have laughed, and you probably heard us on some of the earlier webinars saying, when we started this 25 years ago, we'd give these seminars and we'd say, boy, the year 20,000 or 2030, I always say 20,000, year 2030 is scary, isn't it? Boy, that's when everything's going to hit, because all these seniors, we're going to have over 70 million seniors in America, and that's going to be so many with having less kids and less people in the workplace. And boy, I'll tell you what, Social Security's in trouble, Medicare's in trouble, Medicaid's in trouble, and we're all going to have doomsday, right? And the reality is 2030 now is right around the corner. We look at it, Dennis and I go, boy, we got a little gray hair ourselves. All of a sudden, 2030, we're looking at it like, yeah, you know what? We're talking 7 years away. It's kind of scary when you look at that, because I do promise you this, there is going to be things you're going to start hearing more and more about these upcoming years. We call it the perfect storm, because right now, nobody's had a conversation about long-term care, as far as huge numbers. But boy, in the future, they're going to have to, because at the end of the day, to bore you with some more stats, when you look at it, there's a lot of unfunded liability out there in America today, right? We have all these people turning older. And when you look at some of these medical costs out there, I mean, look at Medicare there, $747 billion right now. That's like tied for second place with our defense budget. Social Security is above that. And we've all heard on the news, Social Security, sitting out there, I think that's at 1.4 trillion right now. That's a huge budget. And they're saying these funds and these trust funds and all these other things where all this money is, they're looking at it, depending on what stats you look at, they just don't have enough money to keep doing what they've been doing. We're giving away a lot of money in America, and at some point they're going to have to tighten the belt a little bit. So Medicare's out there with 65 million people on the Medicare enrollees, and 57 of them are seniors. So that's a big part of that unfunded liability. Medicaid is out there at, 89 million people are taking 728 billion in 21. And that's really fast growing. And especially with COVID, it really took off. So Medicaid is out there. Some people say by 2028, it could be over $1 trillion. for Medicaid alone. So when you're looking at that, overall, we have a health crisis in America. Everybody knows that. You may not know the numbers, but I'll tell you what, if you look at overall numbers right now, $4.1 trillion for medical costs in America today, and that's about 20% of our entire GDP. So we know that there's a lot of costs going out for medical. And as people get older, we know that that's going to get worse and worse, right? People are going to need this custodial care. And when we get into Medicaid, we teach whole seminars just on this whole thing we're talking about right here, where we'll teach hour-long things when we were back talking to LTC specialists. And we're talking about how Medicare, remember, is for the medical condition for people over 65 in America, right? Medicaid is kind of a welfare program anyway, slice it. It's shared by the federal and state government, varies by state, and it's shifting right now because the federal pumped in more money because of COVID. So it's shifting over, and states will be taking about a third of that, right? And the states are panicking because individually in any given state, it averages out to be almost a third of their state budgets, like 28% on average across the country. Some states, it's well beyond a third of their budget entirely. So they're looking at it going, we're spending all this money. People are going into nursing homes and they're just saying, well, you got to take care of me now, got to take care of me now. We used to train back in the day, and I think Dennis will back me up. We talked about the fact that, boy, there were poorhouses in America. Remember, before Social Security and before Medicare jumped in, that wasn't that many years ago, right? 65, all of a sudden, we had poorhouses all across America where people said, if your family doesn't take care of you, you're in. We're not going to be able to do much for you. Well, thank goodness we're not at that stage anymore, and we take care of our seniors. But I promise you this, right now, there's a lot of Medicaid Spenddown we're going to talk about, and I'm going to show you a little calculator, and Dennis and I are going to talk about what Spenddown is so you at least know what it is. We are going to show you how to kind of defer the conversation, though. We're going to show you that it isn't as big a deal as it used to be, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I do want you to know that doesn't mean it's not as big a deal to get some type of protection in place so people have some self-insured coverage for these type of things. Because I promise you this, there's people down south, there's a couple states that have like 2 people on their entire Medicaid board whose job it is to go out and try to collect assets from people. And at the end of the day, people are going into nursing homes, they're dying, and then they're going out there and they're coming and taking the house and taking some of that stuff. But again, we'll talk about the fact that there's a lot of loopholes and there's a lot of Medicaid planners out there, and there's a lot of things out there that they can hide some of these assets right now, and they can get on Medicaid and have the government take care of them. But the big key we're going to talk about today is don't get yourself too worried about all those stats I just threw at you, and don't sit and panic about it. All you need to do, start the conversation. Make sure you tell people, I promise you this, you'll be glad you have something in place, because if Medicaid does what most experts think it's going to do, and we end up having those budgets go down and the purse strings go down, think about it from a government standpoint. If you're the one controlling the purse strings, 75% of the people are using 30% of that budget for Medicaid. 25%, the oldest seniors in the nursing homes, they're the ones using 70% of that Medicaid budget. And they're the ones out there saying, do you think they're going to pull out the purse strings and give more money? No, chances are it's going to be less and less and less. Okay. So again, I can't stress enough. We talk about it. And Dennis, why don't you talk about all the different protections we have in place, and then we'll jump in. If I hate to be sitting on my soapbox, but go ahead and add in your insights on that if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I think, coming back to all those particular statistics, the best thing you can do when you're talking to your clients, and we've given you this in previous webinars, but when you think about this exposure, if you will, the care exposure, I like to say it's the single biggest unplanned, unfunded, in many cases unforeseen liability that your clients will ever face. And it's really the one thing that could wipe them out. And whether they get wiped out because they didn't have coverage and they have to end up spending down to get onto Medicaid, or whether or not they have coverage and they still go through their coverage and end up with using those assets and income. The key is, as Tom indicated, is you have to make sure that they understand that Medicaid is a very complicated, process, and and you don't want to become someone who is just giving willy-nilly advice in this area. And so starting that conversation, as Tom said, it's always best to be proactive and to help people to plan ahead. And of course, we have a pretty darn good lineup. We call it our perfect portfolio of traditional long-term care with carriers like Mutual of Omaha, NGL, Thrivent, hybrid solutions, One America nationwide securing, whether that's a single pay or whether that's a continuous pay or whether that's a 10 pay. The opportunity to get involved in the short-term care, what we call extended care conversation with Manhattan, Wellesley, and the GTL Recover Cash. And even that, three of those four are actually our proprietary products. And then also in the home care only. So plenty of solutions that are available and plenty of opportunities. Where you end up sometimes running into the whole Medicaid discussion is that people just wait too long, and they end up in that situation of spending down. And Tom, when we speak about ways in which we can mitigate some of that spend down, at least in the traditional vein, that traditional long-term care, there is partnership plans where it does have an offset and does protect assets to the extent of what they have in coverage. And we don't necessarily need to go there, too far down that path. But I think that when you're probably going to get into this a little bit more, but it's really it's a two-pronged test. Okay, there's an asset test, and there's the income test. And so this whole aspect of with this calculator will actually do the work for you to help you to navigate through that process. And these rules change every year. Every year they change. And again, remember, there's different ways in which, as Tom indicated, that people can artificially impoverish themselves and manipulate the system. And I would just be careful that, if you want to dispense information, a lot of this is for you to get smarter on the topic. And as Tom said, we don't bump into it as much anymore about people, because most people today want to, they're more willing to plan ahead. In the early days, people were not thinking so much about these particular solutions. Now, a lot of the experiences around them with family members and others have raised their awareness to where they're raising their hand. So, Tom, walk them through a little bit of the overview on this calculator, and then I've got a couple other thoughts to share maybe on the back end of our conversation here.
You bet. Yeah, on the next screen, because this again it's kind of funny, because like Dennis said, is it used to be a bigger deal, and we're going to talk a lot about that, how this developed and the partnership plans came about. And boy, it wasn't that many years ago. This is part of our LTCCO thing that we have here at GoldenCare, and our real hardcore long-term care guys used this a lot. And I say used as past tense, because in reality now it's still a great tool. There are still some agents who still use it in the sales presentations, and it's a great way to show just how strong a true legitimate Medicaid spend down was supposed to work. And it really shows, you're going to see here, a pretty defining picture. Again, for you guys, don't sit and look at this like, boy, now I got to learn how to use another tool here, like the InstaPivot and all that. You don't have to. We don't even have this on the site, as a matter of fact, yet, because we don't think you guys are going to have to use it. But I did want to have, since we have a webinar on Medicaid spend down, I wanted you to show you a real life example of kind of how it works. Okay, so, and again, we're going to clarify that later on, like Dennis said. So basically what this tool will do is you just put in the client information, put in their value of their primary residence, if they had other real estate property. And again, like Dennis said, really complex deal. So this tool has a lot of disclaimers in it saying there's a lot of some exceptions here and there. This is just to give you a broad bird's eye view of it. But it's a nice, strong tool. Net worth other than real estate, this would be all their other assets that they might have. Some people will be in the $1 million mark. Some people will be 50,000. You know what I mean? I just put in here a $400,000 house with 500,000 of extra besides real estate net worth. Okay, so then the state of residence, you can put in anything you want there. If I put in Iowa, it'll automatically change to whatever I need to do. Okay, here's the client ages. I just put them at 65. client monthly income, you can put that at whatever you want, maybe $8,000. Let's say they're at $6,000. Okay. $2,000 that the spouse makes, because I'm doing this for the one primary applicant that I'm trying to make the point for, in this case, John. So when I talk to John, I say, you're making $6,000 now with your Social Security and everything else coming in, $2,000. These numbers could be whatever you want. You'll see how it pans out. And then I'll talk about this partnership later where we could sell a policy and show them the power of that. But for now, if we just went in there without any other policy, because truthfully, in this short-term care initiative, we're not going to sell traditional long-term care in most cases. So you guys aren't going to sell that. So we wouldn't have partnership. But anyway, we just want to show you what it is. So agent name there is obviously whatever you'd have if you're using this. And then when I go over to the Medicaid Spenddown, it's got to think about it. And I'm on a webinar here. It doesn't zoom in super well, so some of you might not be able to see the small print, so don't worry about that. But basically, there's, like Dennis said, an income and an asset spend down. So the first one I clicked was the asset spend down, and basically, you remember they had $400,000 house and $500,000 was the $400,000 was the house. Excuse me, $500,000 investment, 400 house, 900 grand, right? So then they basically, if you simplify it down, you say there's non-countable assets. And if you're married, your house is going to be safe. Okay. So there's 400,000 and there's a bunch of other things that you can have over here, like an automobile, etc. So you just broad picture this. Even our agents, we train them to use it. Say, don't get picky on how many assets they have and how much their car's worth. Just give the broad thing. If somebody says, yeah, I got a big old savings account of this or a big IRA or something. So 900,000, 400,000, subtract that house out of there. And if John had to go into a nursing home, it'd be $500,000 that they had as countable assets, in this case, simplified down. All they do when they look at a Medicaid, when you apply for Medicaid, they say, let's split those assets amongst mom and dad. Okay, $250 each. And then the partnership plan as of January 1, this number is when it first came into effect. They became part of this partnership plan program, the Own Your Future campaign. Okay, then that came out in 2010. But the main thing here to realize is right here. Institutional spouse, if dad were to go into the nursing home, they say, you know what? You have to spend down your assets first. So you've got $2,000 that you get to keep. So you'd spend down 248 grand. Mom, you have 250,000 and you got to spend down some, but we do have a spousal minimum and maximum in Iowa right now as of 2023 of 30,000 about, or $148,620. So you got to spend down till you hit that maximum monthly allowance, or excuse me, maximum asset allowance for the spouse. So if you look at that, those are extreme numbers, right? I mean, you're looking at going, so if you were to go legitimately on Medicaid, you would spend down 349 grand before Medicaid would pay the bills. They would look at it and say, just so you know, you got to spend that about if you end up using that much in a Medicaid situation. Okay. Now, again, we're going to talk on the next screen about the fact that there's ways around this, and there's a lot of people out there with Medicaid planners, et cetera. We'll talk about that on the next screen, but this is legitimate how Medicaid spend down was intended to work. Okay.
And Tom, I'd just like to point out that the nice thing about this calculator is that we update it. It's the current 2023. So if you go down to that, what Tom was referring to was the acronym is CSRA, the Community Spouse Resource Amount. And again, not to get technical with you, but you know, Tom has an extensive background in this area. I do as well. I'm a certified financial planner by training, and used to have an elder law attorney back in the day when I was on the retail side of the business. And this is complex stuff as it relates to the rules of the road that he's showing you. He's simplifying the process, but believe me, there's a lot more when you're in terms of in the nitty gritty of this, when you get into those countable and non-countable assets and income that you have to be factoring into. And it's not something I would just give you the biggest word of caution I could. Use this to educate yourself. Don't use this because you're going to start dispensing advice on how someone petitions to become Medicaid eligible. That is a slippery slope, and you will do yourself a great disservice because of the complexity of this. And that's really, you need to leave it to the experts who are the elder law attorneys who actually do this for a living, if you have a client that's faced in that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great disclaimer. And this, you'll see this tool when you read the intro and everything else. It does say, this is not to replace that part of it. It's just to give you an idea, to make sure that you kind of understand the concept of how it works. So I totally agree with what Dennis said. And especially even with our long-term care specialists, we were really cautious about this. With you guys, like I said, we didn't put this tool up there for you because of the fact that we wanted you to know how it worked. And if any of you said, I really would like to take a closer look at that, that's fine. But again, we don't want you to get in there and start doing Medicaid planning with your seniors, and especially since we're not selling partnership long-term care where we would have some value. So, but anyway, just real quick on the income side of it's the part that a lot of people forget about, is that there's ways to hide assets and there's different ways to use loopholes that Medicaid planning can do for you nowadays. But the income, again, is a little bit tougher, because if John's at 6,000 and Mary's at 2,000, basically they say in Iowa you can have 33,716 for the other spouse. And since Mary wasn't up to that 3716, John can give her that money out of his. So John would have to spend every month the 4284. She would be able to keep 3715. And that's really the simplest way to look at it. And obviously there's loopholes and there's all that other complex stuff about additional income for special circumstances and all that fun stuff. But the way the law is written, and it's as its 30,000 foot level is right now in Iowa, you can keep $50 if you go to a nursing home, John, to be able to play your bingo and stuff. You just don't have very much money because all that coverage is already covered if you go on Medicaid, et cetera. So $50 a month. So John's down, he loses that 4,234. She gets to keep the 3715. And then it comes down to the case of saying Mary would have to live on 3716 as opposed to being part of this $8,000 that we have now. So that's all the Medicaid planning does. And if you had long-term care, you can go in there and click on that, and it would show you that, hey, if you had insurance, it would basically say, out of your assets, we'll take dollar for dollar away from whatever long-term care traditional policy you had. And I don't think we need to spend time to show that, Dennis, to you, but it basically is a partnership program that when we get back into it, we can explain verbally to you. And it's not too complex by any stretch of the imagination. And it's something that nowadays, I don't think you guys are going to have to worry about. You just have to be able to speak to it. If somebody happens to bring it up and says, now, will this qualify for partnership? We don't want you to sit and panic and say, I've never even heard that term before. Make sense? Dennis?
Yeah, Tom, I think the important takeaway of with the calculator is that there's both sides of the test. So just because your client may qualify on the asset side, they have to qualify on the income side as well. And remember, Tom showing that example of a married couple. Had that been a single, and back, Tom, not that you have to go back to that slide, but if you went back to the income visual just for a quick second, maybe if you wouldn't mind.
On the calculator?
On the calculator, yeah, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
If you go back one, if that happened to be a single individual, as an example, the numbers change as far as what they're allowed to keep, that monthly minimum maintenance amount. And so it may have been a situation, back to the example that Tom was using originally with the couple, that if it was just John, I think it was, that you had originally, I don't know if it was John or was it John and Mary?
John, yeah.
John. Yeah, so John's situation there, just one quick point. John's income, if he's surpassing that monthly minimum and he doesn't have Mary that he can shift it to, remember that becomes what we call SOC, share of costs. That goes to the government. So, there's a lot to this whole program as we get into the whole aspect about planning ahead. And that's why I encourage you to, if you want to get smarter on it, to learn, because that becomes an objection. You can probably deal with the objection because you'll be smarter in understanding kind of the rules of the road, so to speak. But I just wanted to point that out, Tom. It's a little bit more in the weeds, but the point is, what you just indicated here, what you're showing on the example as far as when it's a couple, and there is also differences when it happens to be a single, just in terms of those amounts.
Right. Yeah. And that's showing this one's a single. If you had 6,000, if you didn't have any other exemptions on that income, you could have 5,950 of it going out the door. So yeah, it's pretty significant. And again, the power of that is you don't have to know those numbers necessarily. I mean, I think really honestly, I've been doing this forever, so it's so second nature. But even if you've seen it for the first time, all you have to kind of remember in the back of your mind is, okay, that makes sense. Where it's like, boy, you got to like split your assets with your spouse, and then they only allow you to keep very, very little of it, like 2 or 3 grand, depending on the state. And again, that calculator is nice because it gives the exact numbers that it's supposed to be. But all you have to worry about is, boy, it does take a lot of your income, and the income part of it, whether you hide your assets or not, really can hit you. And the biggest thing we're going to talk about on this slide is talk about first the partnership program, just give you a little background to it, and then show you that the biggest key again is starting the conversation and getting some type of private plan in place, because as all this stuff hits the you know what, and all of a sudden we're saying, boy, the states are tightening up. Medicaid, I can see the headlines now. I've been doing this so long. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all that stuff is just going to get hit hard, because they're going to start saying, we can't hit hyperinflation here. We can't turn into Argentina. We got to start realizing we're not going to be able to keep giving away too much money. At a certain point, they're going to have to say, you're going to not get the quality of care you really would like to have with our government services. There's just no way we can do it. And I promise you, that is not a Trumper talking to you. This is Democrat, Republican, anywhere in between. Doesn't matter where you sit politically. At the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers. We have a lot of seniors and a lot less people working. And at some point, it's going to get to the point where the government's going to say, we're running out of money just to give it away. So I do want you to be aware of that. But the partnership program was going to try to stop that. And Dennis, you know this as well as I do, or better. Why don't you give a quick bird's eye view or elevator speech on talking about what partnership was and where that started anyway? Does that make sense?
Yeah, partnership started actually in 4 states originally: California, New York, and Connecticut, and Indiana.
Yeah.
And as such, that was the original. And then it was actually when George W. Bush was president, you ushered in, as part of the Budget Reconciliation Act, they ushered in this law, if you will, an expanded partnership to all the states that allowed individuals. It was designed with this Own Your Future to encourage people to go out and become self-reliant and take individual responsibility. And Tom and I have been doing this a long time, and I don't think that really moved the needle as such, that encouraged people to go out, and if they bought long-term care, whatever they had in long-term care value, let's say 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, that would be, it would protect them dollar for dollar against the Spenddown. That, in other words, if someone had $500,000 of total assets that they had to spend down, but they had their $300,000 long-term care, they wouldn't have to spend down that becomes insulated dollar for dollar. But again, probably most of you, as we talk, because of the ages that you're working with, one, you're not going to be probably selling traditional long-term care solutions because of the underwriting and the complexity and the difficulty as it relates to placement. But you should just know that there's probably going to be more and more, as Tom talks about, this silver tsunami that's going to hit us here in the next handful of years. Don't be surprised if there's more steps that the government may take to try to be as persuasive as they can. Because right now, if this was a pie-shaped visual in front of you, and you looked at who was responsible for paying for care, well over 50% of that pie is going to fall onto, as Tom said, he gave you the numbers, it's going to fall onto the government side. And whether that's, you're talking about federal, state, you're just talking about, again, where these states are just hemorrhaging to the point where they can't continue to subsidize and pay with the unfunded liabilities at the level that they're at right now. But to the point about planning, there is people who do, get involved in looking for ways in which they can work with elder law attorneys, and they look for compliant Medicaid annuities that can take an asset and convert it to an income. There's all kinds of strategies that are involved, not to really go down that road, because we're more bigger picture people looking at just being preventive in general by actually planning ahead and looking at some of these solutions that we've been sharing with you about, that people can actually qualify for today in the extended care and gain a plan in place that's actually going to really reduce the likelihood that they'd ever have to go through that coverage to end up then incurring the responsibility of spending income and assets. So
You bet.
That's the concept, I think, behind the whole aspect about avoiding some of the spin down situations.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why we don't use that anymore. Even with our existing agents, very few of them push on partnership anymore. It used to be huge for several years, and then all of a sudden now, when we got into 2020 and beyond, especially, they started realizing that with the shifting market, and Dennis will talk about that on the next slide about with long-term care, and then we'll wrap it up just to give you an idea to say you don't have to worry about it too often that people are going to say, well, what about the spend down and the partnership programs and all that? I want you to know what it is. But like Dennis said, the key is, the spend down nowadays, there's so many ways with Medicaid planners to be able to hide assets and put them in these different trusts and different things like that, that a lot of your people aren't going to be too worried about the spend down yet. But what I want to tell you is, I'm not as worried about the spend down as I'm worried about these states starting to realize that we can't pay out like we were doing. So when you look at the claims reality, most claims, you hear about those huge ones. We don't have a crystal ball, but you hear about people having Alzheimer's and being on claim for 10 years, et cetera. You know what? Those we can't solve with short-term care, but most claims are relatively small, and especially with short-term care with the easier claim triggers, most people are going to have these ability to have a 2-year plan with a short-term care and have more than enough coverage to keep them from ever having to go on Medicaid. Because I'll promise you this, the biggest problem with Medicaid to me is not the spend down, which can be ugly, but there might be ways around it. But most of the people who don't have the big pocketbooks aren't doing that Medicaid planning. But at the end of the day, I'm more worried about, for my loved ones, saying, you know what, if you get stuck in Medicaid, remember, it wasn't that many years ago we had poor houses in America. I mean, at a certain point, if they say, we can't give you the best quality care, you know what, there's 26,000 nursing homes out there. There's only about 6 new ones that came around in 2023. They're losing money because the government isn't paying them as much as they'd like to be paid to offer the best service out there available. So you have to find some of these places that have the private pay that are going to give people a good quality care, and you're going to be able to have a policy that they're going to count on, that they know they're going to get full payment for. And again, that gets a little muddy in certain states, so don't worry too much about that. But my big thing is, if you start out with an insurance policy, it's much harder for them to move you away. Even once that insurance policy expires, it's harder for them to move you out of that Medicaid nursing bed and move you to a different state or a different part of the state because they ran out of beds and they ran out of budget. So it happens all the time, and I'm not trying to be scare tactic, but to me, I tell my people really broad strokes. I say, you know what, get your extended care taken care of. There's a lot of gray hair in America. We all heard about all these budgets that are going to be in trouble. I don't want to be the one having to worry about that if something happens to you 10 and 15 years from now. If you were my loved one, I'd say get something in place. Let's get a short-term care policy in place. Let's try to cover that first couple of years, and it'll probably be all you'll ever need. But if it isn't, at least we got a couple of years in that give you the best quality care possible and the best chance to have choice and independence. So that's my little soapbox on that. I'll tell you, shifting market, the way the market's going right now with long-term care, again, the partnership emphasis is not as big a deal, but we would like you to be aware of it and make sure you're there. So Dennis, I don't know if you want closing thoughts or go into,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Tom, I think this, just in kind of closing things up, yeah, things have shifted. I mean, in the early years, as Tom and I were doing this for so long, we're both high mileage. We still both feel we've got some pretty darn good tread left on the tires. But the reality is, the early days, there was double-digit growth in the long-term care space, and then it hit a point, and about a handful of years ago, where the going got a little tough. The carriers' appetite started to go away because of the fact that they were starting to see where the claim experience was, and the over 12 billion that the industry was paying out in claims, and as such, to people who had bought those early on and not thinking that people would keep the plans. And so in recent years, we've been kind of pioneering. Not only were we a pioneer back in the day of taking carriers like Mutual of Omaha from number 10 to number 1 in the traditional space, but we've been pioneering and out in front of this whole curve that we feel is this next wave, which is to lead the charge on these extended care plans, because we know that consumers and agents have been demanding change in the marketplace. They want products today that have less underwriting. They want products today that are less complicated. They want products today that are less costly. And we have the answer. We have the solution. And that's why planning ahead is a much easier process than reacting to a problem because you waited and you were just avoiding, paying premiums, thinking that you're going to let the government take care of you. And Tom, just to wrap it up, I'll just give, if we could summarize everything that we've said on this, including the fabulous calculator that you walked everyone through. And I don't have a problem if we want to make that available, but I just want you to know at the end of the day, if you're going to have that conversation and it comes up and that seems, and we had an earlier webinar today about overcoming objections, and the objection is that that the government's going to take care of me, then I say this, just tell people it all comes down to what I call the 3 C's, the letter C. So if your client's willing to give up control, if your client's willing to give up choice, if your client's willing to give up cash, then that's what they're going to get when they end up on Medicaid, because they're going to lose the choice about dictating where they go to get care. Tom just talked about that, and the value of private pay, insurance pay. They're going to lose control because that's, again, the government's now dictating that control, and that Spenddown is real. They have to give up cash to get to the point. There is no free lunch. And now the government is even aggressively coming back in those states to recover assets. Some states are more aggressive than others about wanting to recover money when people did artificially impoverish themselves and manipulate the system. So I guess that's my summary, Tom, as it relates to this whole Medicaid spend down, is just think about those 3 C's.
You bet. You bet. And I totally agree. And again, we'll show you have the support here. Go to integritystc.com. That gives you everything you need on the sales side, underwriting tools, all the videos that you need that you'd ever want to have. If you can bore yourself to tears with listening to Dennis and I yap at you over and over and over again. All these different products in our portfolio are there with assets and information on each of those products as well. So we did have one question out there that came in, and it was a comment, and I'll tell you what, Dennis, shows we got a sharp group in this integrity realm. One gentleman typed in and said, the government is going to take care of me as a fantasy, with a little smiley face. And true story. It's
Yeah.
Your clients Tom, nowadays know that. It used to be like, oh my gosh, you don't think they'll be around? You think there's going to be problems? Now most of your seniors you talk to are going to be like, yeah, I'm right there with you. I don't really trust whether the government's going to be able to do it. So,
well, Tom, you hit it on the head earlier about the reimbursement levels in terms of what the government gives back, and that's why those thresholds are why we're in danger, is because the government is not reimbursing these facilities. And so if you think they're the same level of care, they're not. And I have a father-in-law right now who's 92, who we just moved to a beautiful small home from a memory care facility because his spouse of 70 years just passed away. And still, although we've been able to mitigate what that cost originally was, which was about $15,000 a month for both of them to be in the memory care facility, it's still around $6,500 a month for him to get care. And I can promise you that if his care gets to the point where he runs out of money before he runs out of care, that facility, which is so nice that he's at, which is really just a home with a total of 5 people in that home, he will have to go to where the government dictates, because if he goes through his assets and he's got enough left for about another 3 years, he's 92. And again, this is what happens if with longevity. It's the good side and the bad side. And even when you have insurance, you may end up, as Tom said, and unfortunately, most of those claims are short. But this is a situation where the quality of care does vary based on whether or not it's private or insurance pay versus government pay. So keep that in mind. And I think, as you like to say, Tom, I'll let you close with your word of advice.
No, absolutely. No problem. And thanks, everybody. Really want to tell you I appreciate you jumping on, letting us yap at you on this Friday afternoon. And I hopefully you saw there, like I said, there's lots of stats and lots of knowledge and all that fun stuff and tools. But at the end of the day, just know enough to understand the fact that logic rules the day with this senior stuff. And most of the time, most people are going to nod their head when you say, do you really feel like with all these baby boomers out there, everybody's heard about this coming crisis, and we just don't want you to deal with it. So the next step is up to you. Contact your marketer, whoever got you on this webinar, get appointed with these products that we have in our Integrity Short-Term Care Initiative, and then head out to that website. Check out all the tools we have there and jump on the next webinar that we have. And just as importantly, have a great weekend. Appreciate all you guys do. Thanks for the coming on. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day and a nice weekend as well.
The next step is yours. Contact your marketer for more information and to start offering short-term care solutions to your clients. And be sure to sign up for our other short-term care hot topic webinars.